So the other day when I was preparing for this message, it was one of those rare days that we get at this time of year where it was actually sunshine all day, not just 5 minutes. And the sky was blue and the clouds were white and it was beautiful. And I remember looking outside my window and seeing the sky and thinking how impossibly blue the sky looked and how impossibly white the clouds looked. And I remember thinking the word impossible. And then I started reading the scripture and that word kept popping up, impossible, impossible. So I went back and started rereading the scripture, thinking, keeping that word in mind, thinking that seemed significant. So I thought, all right, what is impossible about these scriptures? Now, I don't know about you, but most people, when they hear the word impossible, they think of it with a negative tone to it, a negative connotation. Oh, that's impossible. You can't do that. I have not thought of impossible in that way. I've always heard impossible as a bit of a challenge. It's impossible, you can't do it. Challenge accepted. Or hearing it with awe and wonder and a bit of magic. That's impossible. And I think part of that is just the different sources that I've had growing up where I've heard the word impossible. In the musical Cinderella, there's a whole song about impossible things. And there's a line that says, what is it? Impossible things are happening every day. It's impossible that this pumpkin should be a carriage, and yet here we are in a pumpkin carriage on the way to the prince. That should be impossible, but here we are. The other place where I've heard impossible a lot is in the British show Doctor Who, because I'm a nerd, and it's there. But the main character in that, the doctor, always is coming across impossible things, and when he sees them, he says, that's impossible. I don't understand. I need to understand. Let's go poke it with a stick. That's the show in a nutshell, really. It's all you need to know. But he always looks at things with awe and wonder and says, that's impossible, and that's amazing. And the other thing is that I grew up very blessed to have parents that never told me that something was impossible. They never said, oh, you can't do that. That's impossible. They never heard my dreams and my desires and said, that's impossible, it's never going to happen. They were always saying, anything is possible, just go do it. So, with that in mind, looking at things that are impossible, it's different for everybody. And when I was reading the Genesis passage, we see Joseph doing something that's quite impossible. You know, his 12 brothers, their 11 brothers, did something that I think most siblings, when they're young, imagine doing. They sold their brother into slavery. Well, they sold him. I think a lot of siblings imagine doing that to their younger sibling. If I just sell my little brother, everything will be fine. The only difference is that Joseph's brothers actually followed through on that. So they got rid of him, and through a long series of events, he went from being a slave to being Pharaoh's right-hand man in Egypt. Now that alone seems pretty impossible. But then there's lots of famine for a couple years, and Joseph's brothers come to him, not knowing that it's him that they're coming to, looking for food, because they're starving and they're dying. And Joseph immediately recognizes them and remembers everything that they did to him. And yeah, he does mess with them a little bit at the beginning, when he first is reunited with them, because they have no idea who he is. They're not expecting the little brother they sold into slavery to be Pharaoh's right-hand man. That just doesn't happen. But they find themselves at Joseph's mercy, and Joseph does something incredible and seemingly impossible, and he gives it to them. He gives them mercy. He gives them forgiveness. And he embraces them, and furthermore, he says, go get everybody and everything and bring them here, and I'll take care of you. Now, I don't know how many of us, when we've been so greatly wronged by somebody, are going to then turn to that person and say, I forgive you. better, why don't you come live with me and I'll take care of you for the rest of your life? I don't think anybody does that. That seems really impossible. And yet here we are. And the great thing is that Joseph does this before Jesus is even on the planet talking about how we need to love and forgive. He's doing it already. Because God is saying this isn't impossible. And then we get to Jesus. And I love this passage. And one of the things I love about this passage is Jesus being really snarky and really sassy. We have a tendency to read the Bible with a monotone, I think, and we don't give Jesus enough credit for being, we always portray him as very reverent and very humble and quiet-spoken. But I think it's all in how you read it. Because there's one passage from verse 32 to 34 where he says, "If you love those who love you, what credit is that to you? Even sinners love those who love them." There's a lot of, he's basically saying, yeah, anybody can do that. What separates you from everybody else? I believe we would call that a burden. Anybody can do that. But it's great because Jesus sandwiches that between two sections of things that we should be doing that by today's standards seem impossible. Loving your neighbor, treating them as you would want to be treated, turning the other cheek, giving them not only your coat but your shirt, going above and beyond, and then saying, give to those who you know you're never going to get that money back from. Don't curse them, love them, be kind, don't judge, don't condemn. So from verse 27 to 31, he's saying, this is what you do. If you declare yourselves to be a follower of me, this is what you do. 32 through 34 is, this is what everybody else does. And then 35 through 38 is, but this is again what you do. This is what separates you from everybody else. And it's not impossible. Because, think about it. Is it really that impossible to love somebody? Is it really that impossible to care about somebody? It doesn't say that you have to like them. There's a difference between liking and loving. I know there are probably lots of spouses here who have had moments where they're like, I love you, but right now I don't like you. I've had friendships like that too, where I'm like, I love you, but right now I just don't like you and I don't want to be near you. But I love you. So it's possible to love somebody even if you don't like them. And Jesus went, again, above and beyond, because he didn't just say these things. He did these things. He was doing them before he spoke this, and he was doing it after. And the greatest example of that is when he was on the cross. Because in that moment, he had a lot of enemies. He may not have considered them enemies, but they considered him an enemy. And that was all the difference. He was saying, I'm going to say this, and then I'm going to do this, so that in the future, they're going to do this, and then they're going to say it. So Jesus was beaten near to death, and then he was put to death in the most brutal way mankind has ever devised. And all the while, I bet you every single time someone came up and hurled an insult at him, or hurled an object at him, he was saying, I forgive you. And then, just for good measure, he got up on the cross, or was put on the cross. And then he actually said it, Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they're doing. If Jesus can do that, when it's hard enough to breathe, let alone speak, how impossible is it for us really to do that as we are? Yes, it's easy for one person to do all of these things. It's very easy for us to say, well, I'm no Mother Teresa. I'm no saint. Okay, yeah, no nobody's Mother Teresa except for Mother Teresa. But why is it impossible? I'm sure that Mother Teresa didn't think of that. She just did it. Because that's what you do, because that's what Jesus said to do. Because that's what God has been saying to do ever since the very beginning of this book. So yeah, it's easy for one person, but it seems impossible for a group of people to do that. It seems impossible for a group of people to set aside differences, to love one another, to give without expecting anything in return. Even a smile or a pat on the back or any kind of gratitude. This past week we had a youth retreat, and during that I told the kids that a church is just a community of believers. It's a community, and a community of believers should be able to do this as individuals, and definitely should be the leading example of how to do this as a group. As followers of Christ, this is something that should not be impossible to us. This is something that should be very possible. Difficult, maybe, but difficult is not impossible. It's just a challenge. So I'm going to ask, what are we willing to believe is truly impossible? What are you willing to write off as it's never going to happen? It's not possible. It's not doable in any realm of belief. Is loving your neighbor, is being kind, is giving out of just for the sake of giving and not being big and showy about it, is that really impossible? Because we should be doing that every day. And we should be looking at that and saying, that seems impossible, but I don't think it really is. Because something can seem impossible, but it doesn't mean that it is impossible. So, what are you willing to accept as impossible, as in it's never going to happen? Or what are you willing to accept as it's impossible, but I'm going to try anyway? Amen.